Welcome into another episode of the College Football Insiders. I'm your host, Richard Johnson. I am joined by my guys, Brandon Marcello and Chris Hummer. We got a rotating cast of characters. There will be more guys jumping in as the show commences. But let's start it off because Brandon Marcello has been so gracious to join us for a little bit and lend us a little bit of his time on this busy day. It's my Arkansas Whisperer.
And a great day for Brandon, should we add. He is having an excellent time.
That's what sources tell College Football Insiders.
So many phone calls.
But Brandon, I know the phone is moving fast and furious. It's because against all belief, beyond all conventional wisdom, Bobby Petrino is, at least for a couple weeks, the head coach of Arkansas football. You were at the press conference. You saw Petrino and Yurchek face the music. Talk about this. What are your takeaways from that? And what the heck are we going to see for the next 6 or 7 weeks in Fayetteville?
Entertainment. That's all we want, right? It's the big top. That's what they're getting here in Fayetteville. You know, it's very hard for me to think, in my opinion, that they're going to be able to have a lot of success or even a microcosm of success. You know, they've got 7 games remaining. 5 of those are against ranked opponents, including a road trip next week after their bye week at Tennessee, which, by the way, you guys remember they upset Tennessee last year. So that's going to be an added dimension there in Knoxville for Tennessee to really fight back. And the other 2 opponents that aren't ranked are combined 7-3 right now. And one of them looks really good, in my opinion. That's Mississippi State. The other one's Auburn, which maybe their coach is going to be on the hot seat later this season. I think in a lot of ways, they've just said, Bobby, you're the most qualified person right now to lead this program, but good luck to you. If you somehow make this into a chicken salad, we will consider you for full-time head coach, because there's no way you're going to, because this schedule is ridiculously hard. And we already seen what that defense has not been able to do against any opponent this season. I think in a lot of ways he's set up for failure, but that's what's going to make it entertaining, because if he doesn't completely fall flat on his face, it's going to have some boosters there going, hey, maybe we should push him a little bit more. So stay tuned.
Chris, we'll talk about coordinator changes in a second at both Arkansas and Oklahoma State. But Arkansas, Bobby Petrino did make 3, I believe, defensive changes to the defensive staff, including defensive coordinator Travis Williams, the architect of that game plan that defeated Tennessee last year. He's out, which, you know, give up 56 points to Notre Dame. I think we all understand how this works. But yeah, it is very interesting that Petrino got rid of Williams, given Williams was one of his former players at both Auburn and with the Atlanta Falcons. There's some familiarity there. What I think is fascinating about this whole deal is how Bobby got his way into this role. I think when they hired him from the jump, before the 2023 season, there were people that thought it was going to happen that year. I thought it was going to happen that year, that he was going to end up in the job, but it didn't. And we headed into this season. I thought all was frankly going to be kind of calm on the Western Front. I thought they would make it to the end of this season before either Sam retired or kind of transitioned to a new role in the athletic department or something like that, and they would do a full clean house. What I think is interesting now is how they've done this kind of halfway point, Brandon, and right now, Hunter Yurchek has made clear both in comments yesterday in the press conference and in comments over the last couple of weeks, like they've got a lot of things that they've got to get situated to get the house in order just as an athletic department for the next coach, whether it's Bobby Petrino or whether it's Brandon Marcello.
Yeah, there's a lot they've got to do. I know some things have been in motion just as far as the financial component of all this for several weeks, not necessarily as far as maybe a potential coaching change, but just the NIL situation there. They've been working on some things there that I can't quite report right now or yet, but I know they're working on some things. Secondly, you know, Yurchek said yesterday at his press conference that they're going to seek out and solicit some search firms so they can start speaking to intermediaries to just gauge interest. And because a lot of the coaches and even some of their agents, for that matter, which is kind of ridiculous to think, aren't even really willing to like start talking about that. But they feel like they're going to have an avenue here where they think that they're going to be able to get a head start and at least know, okay, these 2 or 3 guys maybe aren't really going to be interested anyway. They're going to throw hypotheticals at them, right? They're going to go, not just, are you interested in the job, but if this job's open and the Florida job's open and this other job's open and you're a candidate for that, would you still be interested in us? So they're doing all their homework with that over here the next month or so before they start moving down the road. They also said they're going to be willing to pay. And they were paying Sam Pittman, I believe, north of $6 million. So it's going to be more expensive than that if they get the right guy. I also heard something interesting that the NIL situation was actually better at Arkansas this year than it was the previous year. Back in 2024, I heard it was $8 million for their roster in NIL, which isn't very good. It's about average when you look at across the FBS, let alone the SEC. But I was told it actually was a little bit higher this year. Yurachek took some issue, and I asked him, several others did, about how are you going to improve your NIL situation? Because of his comments a few weeks ago, if you remember, saying that Arkansas is not built to win a national championship financially. We're not set up to do that. He's tried to clarify all that recently.
Maybe don't say that.
Don't say it. Yeah, I mean, don't say the quiet part out loud. Don't tell the truth. I know reporters want you to tell the truth, but don't tell your fan base that. But he did say that he admitted, he goes, Sam Pittman did not have the resources to be competitive in the SEC. So, immediately you go, so why do you fire him? Just give him more money or something like that. You're saying you didn't set him up for success. So they said the next coach will be. What does that look like? I don't know, but they better have a plan together to get interest in this job. And there is interest in it. It's an SEC job, but it's an SEC job where, are they ever going to get the SEC championship game again like they did in the early 2000s, mid 2000s? Things can happen. Times change, but man, it's been kind of downward since then, other than that one little flash in the pan with Bobby Petrino back in the late 2000s or early 2010s, I should say.
And I will say, like, to Brandon's point about NIL, and obviously we do need to stipulate that NIL is different from Rev Share, and I don't think many schools are really quite sure what their NIL situation is going to look like going forward. The word NIL gets thrown out interchangeably with Rev Share. They're different. Most schools are going to be around $14 million in Rev Share no matter what. It's just how much you can add on top when you're talking about the resources. But Arkansas was a school that pretty consistently had its really good players poached in the portal. Maybe not all of them. Like, they were able to retain core pieces of the roster. But that is a roster that lost key pieces every offseason. And that makes it very hard for your head coach to be competitive in a league like the SEC where everybody's keeping their talent in place. So Arkansas does need to figure out a way to invest more in that roster and to give the next head coach the pieces. I do always find it amusing that instead of giving the current head coach the opportunity to fix his situation by actually giving him the resources, they usually just want to find a new toy out there to play with. But that's just the reality of life and the reality of boosters out there.
Yeah.
So.
In the NIL Go situation, Yurachek even said, this is what was interesting to me. He said that the average pay for players through NIL Go at Arkansas this fall was $15,000, which if you multiply that by 105 people, that's only $1.5 million. But he said, that's pretty good considering everything. And I'm just like, that's not great. I mean, $1.5 million for your quarterback would be fine, but.
Well, no, Brandon. NIL Go is specifically going to be the outside deals.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. But other rosters are paying more money through NIL Go still.
I mean,
are you sure about that? You sure about that?
Yes, there are some larger numbers out there, but I think right now is a very tenuous situation in college football in terms of how much even the largest schools they think can raise outside of that rev share pool. It helps if you have an Arch Manning who can get $500,000. This is just a random number. I'm not reporting that Arch Manning got $500,000 from Warby Parker, but like that number can balloon significantly if you have a star player who can command actual dollars. But the actual NIL dollars that are coming from your local car dealership as they donate $25,000, I think those are a little harder to come by right now than most people think, and it's going to make this transfer cycle particularly interesting because I think it's a little unclear, how much, if at all, salaries can go up, and they might go down compared to this past season.
I almost asked a question that I should ask off the air. This might be a topic for later after I compare some notes with you guys about NIL Go. I had a fascinating conversation with someone. I said earlier this week, it was this weekend, about what's going on there. we'll talk about this off air, and it might be a topic later on a later show. But
I love that.
It's interesting out there.
Banking content for later. What I think is interesting about Arkansas structure right now, I was talking to a guy who's kind of trying to get in on the GM space, just about the landscape of the open jobs. And he brought up the fact that it's just a little unclear the personnel staffing component to this. Arkansas has Remy Cofield, who is actually a very unique GM in that he is the GM of both the basketball program and the football program, which is somewhat unheard of, at least at the top level SEC echelon programs. And it was just like well, how's this going to work? Am I actually going to be under the new head coach? Am I going to be under Cofield, who's a basketball guy, comes from the Boston Celtics? There's some interesting stuff about how this is structured. John Talty has joined the program. I want to bring him in really quick on this Arkansas discussion, because both John and Brandon, I should say, we've talked about this in the last couple of days, just how much money Arkansas has, John, in sort of its donor base, or at least the big swinging donors that you can think of and that you can name and that are front facing, and just how much of it's not actually going to Arkansas athletics or specifically Arkansas football, John.
Yeah, I'll talked to somebody about this recently, and I'll give you this. I'll read this quote real fast. Someone plugged into the Arkansas situation. I think you would be amazed how much all those people don't give to anything, to any athletic endeavor. Everybody assumes you've got Walmart, JB Hunt, they give, don't get me wrong, but you'd be amazed at what they don't give. So I think that there's this perception, and Brandon knows it super well. Like, there's a perception like, oh, we've got Walmart money. It's like, there's some Walmart money, but it's not Phil Knight Nike money. Like, there's a lot of money in the state of Arkansas, but it has not flown to athletics quite the way that you'd expect. And I jumped in late, so you guys might have already talked about this, and Brandon knows it well. But like, some of the biggest money goes to basketball too, and not football, and that's been a challenge in the past. So I think that it swings both ways. I think there was a time where people thought Arkansas might not be a good job, like it's in a tough location, maybe not the best recruiting base. But then it'd flip it. They got a lot of money, and now it's kind of flipping the other way. It's like it's maybe not quite as much money as you thought, and certainly I think Hunter Yurachek tapped into that. And I think you're hoping that maybe not hitting rock bottom, but Notre Dame was pretty bad, but that maybe a result like that will spur these people on to believe, all right, we got to start giving more if we want to avoid results like this moving forward.
There are certain candidates out there that some of these boosters or would-be boosters, as we could probably better call them right now, that really like. And if Arkansas can show that they're going to go after them potentially and then show interest, I think that would open up the pocketbook for a couple of these guys that have been mentioned already. But you're right. Like the Waltons, for example, I mean, they've given, I mean, I don't know the exact figures, but they've given probably, I'm guessing my opinion, I think they maybe have given more money to Missouri than Arkansas in recent years, to be quite honest. And that's just the family dynamic changes. People age out, younger kids come up. But Coach Cal has tapped into that. I mean, he had the president of Walmart come to a practice, and like they filmed it and made a big deal of it. Like there's someone from Walmart here. They do exist. They don't just put their logos everywhere. But you're exactly right. That the other thing is, it's like basketball gets a lot of money, yes, for their roster, but so does baseball. They're big into baseball at Arkansas. I mean, that's the one program they're like, we got to win a national championship. We got to win a national championship. And they put,
and by the way, just Brandon, that's like $10 million. If you want to be a serious baseball program all in, like it's not nothing.
Yeah. It's a lot of money, and they put a lot into that, and obviously a lot in basketball. So they're trying to figure out how to do that with football. And I think it's as simple as they've got to galvanize the support with the right type of coach. Cause Pittman just wasn't it. I know Pittman sold himself on understanding Arkansas and all that, but then I'd hear people going, no, he doesn't. It was always this weird disconnect. It was almost like they didn't quite believe him, even though he was being truthful, but I don't think he quite did get it. I mean, you have to be ingrained in the culture at Arkansas and understand how it really is different. And you can't just say it and you understand it. You have to show it.
People will also tell you that there's some changes in Sam over the years. The guy who got the job kind of out of nowhere in the beginning and then kind of becomes one of the fun stories of college football. He had a local attorney as his agent at the time. He drops her. He goes with a big dog. People start seeing some changes behind the scenes and him cashing in a little more. I think that turned some people off, is what I would say from some of the people that I've talked to.
Yeah, and some people I've talked to said that they felt behind the scenes at Arkansas that he felt intimidated a little bit by everything that was going on, just with losing players left and right, trying to fix it, go in the transfer portal. You got Bobby Petrino there in the same room with you. You're working together. You're trying to figure out a plan. And then, listen, he hired Bobby Petrino to save his job. That's what he bought. That's what he was sold, right? And that's what he bought. But, if you go back and look, Petrino was brought on in a situation where he had some booster support, and there was a mediator there with one of the high-profile boosters that set it all up and helped go, hey, we can get this to work out. And it worked out for Arkansas for a year. They got the offense going because that team could have been really bad last year. It really could have been really bad. And they somehow made a bowl game. But there's always the other side of it that, okay, it worked. What are you going to do in year 2, in year 3? And what happens if things do go south? And we're seeing that right now.
Can I ask a quick question?
At the end of the day, in my estimation, they brought the fox in the hen house here. They brought Bobby Petrino in here, and whether he had to do it kind of, grinning and smiling or whatever, because I remember when that happened, I was working for a different outlet. I wrote a column about it, and I requested comment from Sam from AD Hunter Yurachek about it, and they no commented. They hid behind a letter in the loophole that Bobby Petrino used to get back in the job because, by the way, you will recall, Bobby Petrino was fired for cause. He was not fired for the thing that you think he was fired for. He was fired for lying about it. That's why he was actually canned. The president of the university had to sign off on Bobby Petrino being rehired because he was fired for cause at the time when all of that stuff happened with the affair and the motorcycle accident, etc. So, yeah, at the end of the day, they brought the fox in the hen house. Sam brought the fox in the hen house, whether he wanted to or not, whether he had to or not, whether it saved his job at the time in the short term or not. It is, in the end, one of the things that cost him his job because it was expeditious for Bobby Petrino to be the interim coach, and we'll see how it goes.
And it's just an interesting dynamic, too, because as you mentioned at the top of the show, Arkansas's defensive coordinator, Travis Williams, was a linebacker for the Falcons on the day that Bobby Petrino left a note in the locker room, said, hey, I'm leaving. Bye. I'm going to Arkansas. And now they have to work together. And Bobby Petrino's practices, I remember when he was head coach at Arkansas when I was just a young pup reporter with actual hair on my head. And he was, we're not bringing players to the ground. Everything was very offensive focused in protecting the quarterback and making the quarterback gain confidence. And a lot of those things was defense be damned. Just go figure it out. And I know that continued here, even as the OC under Sam Pittman, that they changed some things of how they would practice. And I do believe, my opinion, that negatively affected the way the defense was able to perform. Not to say they would have been great, because if you look at the roster with the guy in the portal, it wasn't great. But simple things as missing tackles, some of the effort stuff, that translates from practice, right, up into games. And I think that hurt them. I do think, though, because of the change they're making now, there's not going to be as much, kind of weird relationships going on. This defense will look better for Arkansas, but the players are the players, right? I don't know just how much better this team can look in the long run.
Chris, this is not the only coordinator shift that we saw over the weekend. Flying under the radar is that Todd Grantham is out as defensive coordinator at Oklahoma State after Oklahoma State lost to Baylor in Philip Montgomery's first run there. So you got Travis Williams out as defensive coordinator at Arkansas, Todd Grantham out as coordinator at Oklahoma State. Does history rhyme with both of these two? Is there a rhythm here, or is there something to pick out?
Yeah, well, first, Clinton Bowen taking over, former defensive coordinator at Kansas for a long time. Really, for the last 4 years, was the head coach of Lawrence High School in Kansas, basically. So he's coming back into college football for the first time in a little bit and taking over this job with Doug Meacham as the interim head coach. And Todd Grantham
I
had
had people there, by the way, that were surprised Meacham ended up being the interim.
I don't think there was a good interim on the staff.
Maybe so, yeah.
I think Todd Grantham, if you look at his resume,
Meacham the interim at Oklahoma State. Philip Montgomery's the interim at Virginia Tech. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. Well, I think some people in every industry have a reputation, and Todd Grantham can be interesting to work with. We'll put it that way. And
I had people in the building that assumed.
What do you mean by that, Chris?
Yeah, I had people in the building there assume that they thought Clinton Bowen would end up being the interim.
Well, he is now the interim defensive coordinator, because I think Todd Grantham had worn out his welcome a little bit in Stillwater already in some ways, and
he had only been there a few months.
Well, you know,
there were whispers here in Arkansas like, will Bobby rehire Todd Grantham because they've worked together, and that's obviously not happening.
And well, the one thing I will say about this on the field is Todd Grantham's scheme is very complicated. Like, he asks a lot of his players. There's a lot of complicated stuff there. Talking to a couple people around that program today, I expect that defense to be considerably simplified. They brought in a ton of new players. They were asking a ton of that new defense to learn and to kind of apply on the fly. And I think you're going to see a much simplified version of that for Oklahoma State. There's still a talent deficiency there, but I think there's some optimism in that building when you make things a little easier on the players, make them think a little less, that the defensive product at Oklahoma State can turn around, and that Oklahoma State can be more competitive on that side of the ball after this change. So yeah, Todd Grantham out. We'll see what's next for him. Obviously, long decorated career, but definitely comes with a bit of a reputation on the back end of that.
The last thing I'll say about Arkansas to close us out here before we head into a break is that if Bobby Petrino gets this job, and this is something that Brandon basically said to me when we were talking on the phone over the last couple of days, like, if Bobby Petrino gets this job, like, it's because they whiffed on a bunch of guys. And it's because it's either A, that they were really successful over the next few games, or they just whiffed on a bunch of guys. And he's just sitting there. And so it's going to be really telling how this goes over the next few weeks here. And I thought it was a really, really salient point that Brandon had about that, because that's really, I remember when you told me that, I was like, oh, well, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, mid-November is kind of like what I've circled on my calendar, as far as like, that's probably when you'll start hearing actual movement. And if you start hearing names drop, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait, can we play over under real quick? 7 games.
7 games left.
I'm gonna set it at 4.5. If he gets over 4.5, does he get that job?
Under.
No. If he goes over 4.5, so he gets to 5, does he get that job?
I think that's Vegas is saying that's too high. I think you said at 3.5.
You think he can get it if he wins 4?
Depends who they are.
Yeah, it's Texas A&M, Tennessee, Arkansas, LSU, and a couple others.
If he beats Texas at Texas, do they just name him the head coach right after the game's over?
Texas and Mississippi State, yeah. It's both Texas schools and Mississippi
State. Their schedule is so hard.
Yeah.
And I know we're about to go to break here, but like, their schedule is so hard that if he wins 4 games, knowing also that their defense was so bad previous games and he can distance himself from it, big, hey, if we had a better defense, we would have beaten Ole Miss, would have beaten Memphis. I don't know. Get some movement there.
And they'd be bowl eligible.
John Talty talking himself into it. College Football Insiders found a way to make it happen. Bobby Petrino, at least for now, the head coach of Arkansas football. What a time to be alive. When we come back from the break on College Football Insiders, we're going to talk a little Virginia Tech, because we got some money coming in Blacksburg, boys.
You can always count on Sundays with the NFL on CBS and Paramount Plus. So even if you can't count on accurate expiration dates,
that is a rookie mistake,
or people appreciating your fashion sense,
Jim, the crowd is not on board here.
you can always count on Sundays with the NFL on CBS, streaming on Paramount Plus.
Glad we wear our good jerseys.
Yeah.
Welcome back on the College Football Insiders. Today, this morning, actually, the Board of Visitors at Virginia Tech University, which is the fancy term for the Board of Trustees, led by a rector instead of a chair of Board of Trustees. Virginia
led by a what?
An incredible place. A rector, Chris. A rector instead of a chairman of the board. Virginia is incredible. Anyway, they approved $229 million in athletic department funding over the next 4 years. That's $47.1 million this year and just over 60 in the next 3 years. 30 million of that per year will come due to philanthropy, due to fundraising. At some point in time, Virginia Tech's probably going to have to explain how they plan to raise money with a football team that is awful and has been awful, but we'll get to that when we get to it. They're pretty much put the future of their athletic department on layaway, but that's another conversation for another day. What this will allow Virginia Tech to do, they say, is it will allow them to get a new front office for football and manage recruiting, talent development, and operations, the resources to attract and retain talented coaches in a highly competitive market, and additional support for other athletic teams, Olympic sports, and infrastructure improvements to several of the facilities at Virginia Tech. This was huge because this is a first step in this coaching search, or maybe a second step after truly naming who was actually going to run the show here. It's not athletic director Whit Babcock. It's visitors Jay McCarthy and Ryan Pearson. Jay Pearson and Ryan McCarthy, They are the two visitors who are running this search. Whit Babcock, the athletic director, is assisting them, I believe was the word that Babcock used in a press conference a couple weeks ago. Basically, right now, Virginia Tech is at a point where now they can prove to folks that, all right, we're going to get a lot of money in the door. Bruce Arians, former NFL coach, is going to be working with the hiring committee as well. I think there are some within the industry, because Arians pretty much said it the other day, that think that they're going to hire a general manager first. There's an open question that I have about whether they're going to hire a CEO of athletics as well first before they hire a head coach. But that's where Virginia Tech's at. Today was a key step for them, guys, as they move forward starting this search.
So I'll just throw this out there. I'm curious what you guys think. With everything we just talked about of Arkansas, with everything you just said about Virginia Tech, Richard, if you're an agent of, say, Rhett Lashley, Ryan Silverfield, whatever those guys, and he asks you, which one do you think is the better job? What are you telling him in this moment? Which one do you think is better given those two different financial situations?
I say it's Arkansas. I say it's Arkansas because, at least the money's there. At least I can touch it. $30 million in philanthropy ain't cash on hand unless there's a big swing in Virginia Tech booster that has underwritten that $30 million per year, by the way. That's $120 million total over the next 4 years. I didn't go to university for math. So, I think it's a little fast and loose with numbers here that Virginia Tech is trying to pull here. I know it sounds all well and good, but that $229 million ain't actually there. It's saying we're going to go out and get it. And the only way we're going to go out and get it is win football games. And we just talked, it's the chicken and the egg. Are you winning because the investment's there, or do you win and then the investment comes? It's that circular reasoning, a circular thing that I think Virginia Tech's trying to pull.
I would ask, what's your goal as a head coach, right? So if you are a young up-and-coming head coach and your goal is to eventually get to one of the 10 best jobs in college football, I'm taking Virginia Tech, actually, because that's the job where I see a pathway of winning and advancing to one of the top 10 jobs in college football after you prove you can do that at a program like Virginia Tech and in a conference where you can conceivably win the conference pretty quickly if you put your roster together. Arkansas is a better job on paper, but it's a much more difficult path to a national championship. But if I'm an older head coach, or I'm a head coach who's comfortable with where I'm at and comfortable where I'm at in the career and want to take Arkansas as a destination job, that's great. But I really do think it depends on what your head coach's objectives are. And I've talked to people in the industry on both sides of this argument, so I can see it either way. I lean towards Arkansas, but if I am a Alex Golish or a GJ Kinney or one of these young coaches with long-term career aspirations, I think you have a much better chance of getting to one of those destination jobs if you do it at Virginia Tech as opposed to taking your lumps at Arkansas for a couple of years as you try to rebuild that program and put it even in somewhat of position to win in that conference.
Yeah, from talking to different sources, our favorite sources, industry ones that we all, I think Chris, you nailed it. The thing that came up that I thought was interesting, and I was talking to someone else about this idea yesterday in a different way, but it reminded me of it. someone pointed out to me was that the path is easier at Virginia Tech. If the money comes in, you look at the ACC pretty wide open. But for instance, say you are a younger coach and say you might want to be there for a while. What is Virginia Tech in 2030? What is the ACC in 2030? There are some things coming down the pike that if you wanted to park yourself somewhere, being in the SEC at Arkansas is more desirable than not knowing where you might be. And again, that's kind of down the road, but a lot of things are going to converge around some of these dates coming up in the future. And Virginia Tech is a program that I think could be attractive potentially when we get the realignment carousel going again, but no guarantee for sure. And so that would be something that would concern me a little bit about maybe getting stuck there. That job is, almost diminishes in some ways in the future if they get left out.
I also think that when you talk about Virginia Tech, I think you are building this thing from the ground up much more than you are at Arkansas. This is going to be a complete and total revamp of this athletic department. It just is. Like I said, they're probably going to get a CEO of athletics, a sort of new mold of athletic director. They are going to get, whether it's first or whether it's after they hire the head coach, a general manager that is of the NFL mold, which is going to be really, really common saying this coaching cycle. We'll see how long it lasts, but
by the way,
it's going to be of the.
I would be very leery if I was a head coach and they hired a GM before me. I'll put it that way.
I agree. That's what I'm saying. Like, if
that's the route Virginia Tech goes, I'm changing my answer to Arkansas.
Yeah, like there's just going to be a total revamp about how they're doing business here. That is, it's pretty fascinating. So, if you think that, I can build it from the ground up and we can make something here that's going to last a long time and we can position it for whatever the future is of college athletics, then all right, take a swing at it.
I just want to go back to something Chris said there because I thought it was smart. I do wonder at what point do we get into a situation where, it's been so assumed for forever, but with these GMs now where you have to negotiate who has final say over personnel as a potential coach being hired, because it feels like that's an NFL issue. It's like who has the power, who doesn't. Some coaches fight for it. Some of them don't get it. But if we keep going GM first before head coach, and it's again, I'll use Jim Nagy at Oklahoma type example, where they have a strong personnel background, they're going to be involved in this and who gets brought on. Like if I'm a coach, I might not be comfortable with that, especially if I don't know who the guy is, if I don't have a working relationship with him. Like this guy's getting the final say in who we recruit. I don't get that. Like that would definitely turn me off if I were a coach and I cared about recruiting.
Yeah, I'm very interested in how that's going to go. And so I want to sort of use that to segue to what you guys are currently working on right now, or at least poking on a little bit, which is Virginia Tech and this Rev Share issue, this potential lawsuit issue. I think if I'm reading the tea leaves about how this is going to go, now that Darren Heitner is apparently involved, super lawyer Darren Heitner is apparently involved. There's some guys that have redshirted. There's some guys who have gone in the portal, or at least announced that they intend to go in the portal. And as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong here, Virginia Tech has stopped their rev share payments. And that's been taken issue with, I think is the way to say it.
Chris, you want to get us started?
Sure. Yeah. So I want to state up front. This is not just a Virginia Tech issue right now. You have, what do we have? 5 open P4 jobs right now, 4 Kent State, so 5F. Anyway, there's several open P4 jobs, and we're at that crux of the season, right, where a player can redshirt and choose to sit out for the year. And that becomes a very sticky moment in time for both program and coach, because as John and I have been poking around on, and we will have a story this week at some point about this, there is really no decider for the two parties to see who gets to determine if you play or not, if the rev share agreement is honored or not. It really just comes down to what's in the contract. And sometimes the contract says very little to nothing, and it puts it in a really interesting spot. And I was talking to somebody earlier today, quite literally, a team tried to put a player in the game on Saturday and they flat out refused to go in because they wanted to maintain their redshirt status. And that's not something that was communicated ahead of time necessarily. And that just shows the new world of kind of college athletics and where we're at. And there's really no decider to tell which side they're right and wrong unless you go to court, which is where I assume some of this will go. So John can speak more to it, but it's a very interesting area.
I mean, we'll have more on it, so I don't want to burn everything we have. But it was interesting as we checked in. It was you would talk to these people like, "Hey, why don't you check in with them?" So I was like, "Let's check in at the NCAA," and they're kind of like, "Well, it's not really our thing. Why don't you check in at the College Sports Commission?" You check in with them, like, "Well, it's not really our thing either. That's more of an individual school thing." And so it's like, all right, so we'll just kind of kick it. Like, we're not touching that. We'll let them figure it out. Which, I don't know. It feels kind of crazy to me. And again, we're in such a weird world where like the classic building the plane as they fly it, and we knew there were going to be hiccups along the way. And so that's why I think this is interesting to me. It's the first time where we saw it happen with NIL, but Rev Share is different. It's through a school. So like this is the first time we're really going through it. But you would just think that, maybe from a pro sports background, like the NFL, MLB, like they would get involved in something like this. If the Yankees just stopped paying one of their pitchers because he did something, like the MLB would be involved, the MLBPA would be involved. And it's just interesting that because there's no college version of that yet, it's just kind of like, guess you got to hire a lawyer and see what happens from there.
The thing to me is like, how could you not write in a clause to cover this in the template agreement? Like that's what strikes me as incredible, because
you can't be paid for play. That's the issue. I mean, that's like, it's the issue of all of college sports right now. Is like inherently this is a pay for play thing, but you can't say that. So you have to find weird ways of working around it.
But John, it's not even an artful dodge to say that if an athlete isn't playing, his revenue generating potential goes down,
right.
his name, image, and likeness potential then goes down. I mean, just call it that.
Right.
And I think it's just I do think some contracts do. I mean, I wrote a story on Florida State this summer and their revenue sharing contracts, and there was a ton of pushback about the way Florida State structured those deals. And I will say part of the Florida State contracts had to do with termination clauses, and part of that was like the value you generate based on how much you play. I think a lot of the pushback there was about injury, not about participation, but there are schools that have protected themselves in this case. But I don't know. It's a weird world, because like common sense says like if you're not playing, you shouldn't get paid, but it's not as simple as that, because these are not employees, and players do not have the same rights as employees, and they do not have the same expectations of its employees. And it just creates a really murky landscape I don't want to take us on too big of a tangent, but it's just not going to get fixed until there's some form of collective bargaining or these players are named employees. That's just the reality. And that's why we see so many lawsuits.
And I was just going to say quickly, like, it came up with the Xavier Lucas thing where they are a lot stronger in their wording about basically needing to be at Wisconsin, playing and all those different things. So I think what you're seeing too, again, is what's just unique about college sports, is that some conferences have a template that everyone in the conference is basically expected to use. Others do not. And correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the ACC has one that everyone uses, which is why you might see Florida State do one thing, Virginia Tech might be a little different. And so you're just seeing there's some different strategies. The Big Ten, that's more templated, that like we're all kind of using this, which a lot of us got to see the Xavier Lucas one because of that lawsuit, and their wording was stronger than from what Chris has seen and others about Virginia Tech.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Like, when I've talked about on the show before, like you've also got some of they get around this with like a payout structure, where the payout structure is a lot different and it pays out more in December or more in January than it does in September. But the red shirt thing, Chris, this is kind of the last thing on this. Is the red shirt thing less of a deal this year than it has been in year past? Because that's anecdotally how I view it, but you're more in the weeds on this day to day. Like, I felt last year there were some really high profile 4-game and done red shirt guys, where I feel like that's mostly not happening here. What you're seeing here is the guys who are going in because their coach got fired, and then the 30-day transfer portal then automatically opens.
Agreed. I think the way contracts are structured in a different way this year than they were in past years. I think schools have been very creative about pushing money back towards December. That's made players very hesitant to move on. And also, like, players are paid a lot more right now than they were in past years. So there's more incentive to keep playing. So I think all of that has to do with the lack of like sitting out and redshirting that we're not seeing quite the same way. But I mean, we have had a couple examples, and I do think I do think it just comes down to the contracts and the compensation. Like players are more motivated to play now than they used to be because nobody likes to lose $10,000 a month that they would have gotten for the next 3 months that they're not going to have if they sit out, like is the reality of it. And in some cases, like it's not $10,000. You could lose 70% of your rev share deal or 70% of your NIL deal because you chose to sit out in the middle of the season and your entire pay structure is backloaded until mid-December. So players are very motivated to stay put because of the money they have on the line.
Yeah, I dig it. We hope you're compelled to stay put because of what we've got coming up next. When we come back on the break of College Football Insiders, we're going to go inside the Insiders for the final segment of the day.
Saturday kicks off at noon, and it's big time. First, Air Force and Navy face off in Annapolis. Then it's big time at the Rose Bowl when UCLA hosts Penn State.
Welcome back to the College Football Insiders. You just saw the advertisement. Big time CBS. Penn State goes from the whiteout atmosphere last week to the Rose Bowl to play a potentially winless UCLA team. I was at the
better
whiteout
quarterback in that game.
To who?
Oh, it's easy.
That's a spicy question from Chris Hummer.
It's easily Dante Moore in that game. Like without breaking a sweat, Dante Moore.
No, are you saying Nico?
I'm saying Penn State, UCLA.
Yeah, who's the better, Nico and Drew Aller?
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I misunderstood. That's a great question.
I think Penn State would be better right now if Nico was their quarterback.
Oh. Producer Aaron, cut that, clip it. Let's get it out there.
Spicy.
I don't disagree with you, to be honest. We've seen what Nico can be with a good team around him. Drew Aller has always been kind of mid to me, to be honest.
Yeah, my thing with Drew Aller is this, especially having been at that game on Saturday night and seeing it, like they redid this entire wide receiver room, and that's still what it looks like. To the point that they go and get Syracuse's best player in April, and this is still what it looks like. Like, eventually, this Andy Kotelnicki offense or this wide receivers or Drew Aller, like something is amiss here. Behind an offensive line that I don't think is your problem, much at all, might be better than last year's offensive line. That line had a first-round pick on it. So I don't really know what's going on here with that Penn State offense. And it leaves us, I think, frustratingly at the same point we always are with James Franklin. They've gotten to the big game. They've lost the big game. They will probably still make the playoff. And we'll do this all again in December when they lose a quarterfinal game, potentially.
As you're talking, Richard, I just have the late, great Dennis Green, like, clip playing in my head of, like, they are who we thought they are. Penn State is who, like, this is who we thought they were. James Franklin is who we think he is. Like, it's just certain point. It's like, I know we got producer Aaron, the NBA guy here. Like, certain point, like, we can't keep explaining away what James Harden does. He's going to shrink in big moments. James Franklin is the same way. He's the James Harden of college football.
That's really good. That's a great take. Look at bridging sports, Chris.
Yeah, I like it. Thankfully, James, I don't think James Franklin pounds the air out of the clock quite the same way James Harden does every possession by essentially holding the ball for 20 seconds before making a decision. Anyway, we don't need to talk about basketball. I have a lot of thoughts on James Harden as a Mavericks fan. Yeah, no, I agree. I think Penn State's in a position where, like, if they take care of business, they'll still make the playoff and they'll be judged in December. But I will say I would take Nico in that game. Like, I mean that. Like, I really think he's the better quarterback right now. But Drew Aller still has the tools.
Oh, love Nico, boy. You and Zedden love Nico, boy.
It's not just me. Like, go look at the advanced stats. Like, Nico's been better this year than Drew Aller. And I'm not the biggest, like, I don't think Nico should be like a first-round pick if he goes out, but like he is making the more competent throws right now consistently than Drew Aller is. But Drew Aller can get there. Like, I would like to see them open up the offense a little bit more. Like, Andy Kotelnicki is a great offensive coordinator, and I think what we're seeing from him and the way he calls it says a lot about how they feel about Drew Aller right now. But it's not like Drew Aller's not capable. We've seen him make these plays at times in his career, but we need to see it, man. Like, we need to see it on the big stage. And no offense to the game of the week on CBS, I don't know if Saturday is the stage we're going to see it, right? Like, if he has a good day in Los Angeles, that's great, but it's not going to determine the path. But, like, we need to see more from Drew Aller, just like we need to see more from James Franklin.
I don't know about you, Chris. That's the game that I'm locked into the most, just in case, especially if our bosses are watching. I will be locked and loaded for that game. It's the only game I care about this weekend.
Absolutely. I do care about some other games on CBS Sports Network, by the way. So
Navy Air Force. I care about that one a lot.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. What's the total in that game? Just asking for a friend. I think at the end of the day, Penn State.
By the way, Navy can pass this year, man. Like Blake Horvath is like legitimate draft pick potentially. So we'll see.
That is true. I do think at the end of the day, this is the best tonic for a Penn State team here to have this game. It's not a bye week, but it's pretty close. All right, Chris Hummer gave you September Heismans today on CBSSports.com. I took Robert Henry Jr., the UTSA running back who's basically averaging a first down per rush. Chris, it was a fun idea, a fun story. You never want to be the December Heisman because that means you're probably not the December Heisman, but a fun exercise nonetheless. We went around the horn as a staff with that.
Yeah, it's funny. If you go back to last year when CBS Sports did their kind of September Heisman thing, Jalen Milroe was by far the runaway favorite, and then Alabama lost to Vanderbilt like 4 days later, so it could change really quickly for your status there. But yeah, I mean, I went with Dante Moore. That's a safe, boring pick. I feel bad kind of making it, but I think he is the best quarterback in America right now. I think he just showed on the road. He was by far the best quarterback in that game going up against Penn State. And when you consider that Oregon only brought back one offensive starter after Evan Stewart got hurt in the summer, and there were so many questions about that offense for Oregon to look the way it does. Like Dante Moore is playing like the best quarterback in America. And I would bet right now he could be a first round pick here in like 8 months if this keeps up. He's shooting up the draft board. So I love Dante Moore and what he's done so far.
I do wonder with Dante Moore are you just in an offense that lets you sort of paint by numbers, but his mobility does give him obviously an added element. John, I don't know if you participated in that, but who was your pick there?
Yeah, I didn't. But in part because my guy Cam stole the one I probably would have went with. And just because I already have, and I'm going to try to trademark this quickly, Theismann season. I just think it has potential for Ty Simpson. We start it here now. I really just wanted to say that when I saw he was already picked, I was like, I can't do it now. But Ty, and you guys know my affinity for Mendoza. So Mendoza, he didn't have an amazing game against Iowa, but coming off Illinois, he was shooting up their rankings. And so it is kind of funny that I remember being at the Bama-Georgia game last year. I think I probably even wrote Milroe's your new Heisman front runner. He looks amazing. And then he just looked not great the next week. So it's very hard. We kind of talked about this, I think, in our chat. It's very hard to sustain it over the course of the season. And I do think as someone who's been able to vote on these for the last few years, I do think there's recency bias, and you think about who's peaking at the right time, and that's where you kind of who's still in the playoff hunt, who's playing in championship games. That's probably where I end up leaning toward a lot of times. But the guys who start out high, I don't know. I'm sure there's been examples, and maybe our research team can come up with some of them, but it's hard for me to think of a guy who started out as the front runner and carried it all the way through.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Now that obviously John Mateer is hurt, that it obviously is going to hurt his chances. Excuse the pun. Moving forward here. Chris, my Heismanologist here. Can Ruben Bain actually do this? Can Ruben Bain win this award as probably the best defensive player in college football right now?
I mean, Ruben Bain's awesome, but he's got to turn more pressures into sacks if he wants to. I think he only has 2 sacks on the year right now. And at the end of the day, the Heisman is a counting award. That's what the majority of voters look at. Not saying good or bad, that's just the reality. And unless he piles up a close to record-setting amount of sacks this season, I just don't see a world in where he enters the conversation. And what if we had 2 defensive players win the Heisman the last 50 or 60 years? The idea of having 2 back-to-back seasons would blow my mind. So I'd be shocked if Ruben Bain can get in there. I think if you're looking for a more long shot Heisman, I'd be talking about somebody like a Diego Pavia, who's got a lot of big games in front of him and has the personality for it, as opposed to somebody like Ruben Bain, as good as he is.
It feels like you basically have to be a quarterback, running back, or, Travis Hunter is a unique, very, very unique circumstance. I think it's unlikely we see a lot more like that. But to Chris's point, it's stats, it's what team are you on? And I think part of the problem is that for defensive guys, you really need, and maybe this is part of what we can do as college football evangelists here. You need people really beating the drum, telling people you have to watch this guy. Because I can remember at Alabama over the years. There's been pushes for like Will Anderson, Quinton Williams. Like they never really get that much traction, but you need people like on the ground saying this guy is different. You need to watch him, and that gets a little bit of traction. Ruben Bain, I don't know, maybe we can drum up a little attention for him, but I don't think it's hit a critical mass or even close to it quite yet. In part because the stats, if you just look at them, are not impressive if you're not watching Miami every game.
I also
if
think,
you're going to be a defensive
frankly,
lineman, you got to. If you're going to be a defensive lineman and win it, you got to have a Sue year. Obviously, I know he didn't win it. Or you got to have Clowney hype coming into the season. Like you got to have something behind you.
Well, to that point, Richard, I also think the reality is like you have to be an NFL draft darling a little bit before you go into the season. People have to have an awareness of who you are. And I think Ruben Bain could end up being a top 10 pick, but at the end of the day, he's like a sawed off like defensive end. Like he is smaller than your prototypical like top 10 draft pick. And he's just not the type of guy that NFL scouts typically hype going into the year or draft inks. Is that, I've always wondered about that. Like, how do you say that?
Draft Nick. I go with
sorry.
Draft Nick.
Yeah, I've never quite understood that phrase, but draft Nicks, like they have to hype Ruben Bain as like a generational guy for that conversation to get going. And we haven't seen it like that this year for really any defensive player. Like, I don't think there's a consensus top defensive player in college football right now. Maybe it's Ruben Bain, but like, I think there's just a lot of really good players, but nobody who's really separated from a narrative standpoint. And at the end of the day, like it's a counting award and a narrative award.
Well said.
Yeah. Last bit on Inside the Insiders. John Talty, close to home this week with a story he's working on with the Maryland Terrapins.
I think that, Chris, are you doing that story?
Yeah, that was me.
Chris. I didn't know it was Chris. I thought it was John.
Yeah, that's my bad.
He snaked it from me. That's why you assumed.
My bad. I'm leaving lots of meat on the bone at Maryland for John. But I did talk to Mike Locksley and a couple of their true freshman stars today, Malik Washington and Sydney Stewart, for a story I'm working on this week. And I think what was interesting talking to Mike Locksley is he's been very open about that this year already, that Maryland just didn't have the resources to keep their roster intact last year. And he got put in a really tough position where he was trying to keep his best players and also pay some of the young guys that were coming in, those like Malik Washington, top 50 recruit in the country. And they didn't really have the money to do both. So he opted, and I think some players gave him no choice by entering the portal to go young. And I think Mike Locksley sort of looks like this is an NFL operation at this point. He's got to get his young players ready to play because they're much cheaper. And even though Mike Locksley feels like Maryland's in better position to retain those players long-term than they were a season ago, thanks to the Rev Share, that Maryland is looking at roster construction in a very different way than maybe they would have 2 or 3 years ago. And even though this is a transfer portal world, they know they have to build from within because it's cheaper and they have to take advantage of the talent that's in the DMV.
Locksley, it's just a blatant plug here, but Locksley, featured prominently in a book I did called The Price. And he had one of my favorite analogies ever in which he referred to Maryland as Macy's. He said, basically, he used some language I can't use on this, but essentially like you don't see Macy's anymore. And that's where we are. We're stuck in the middle. We're getting eaten by the top dogs, and we're losing all of our depth guys to the smaller programs that can offer them bigger roles. They're kind of stuck. And so smart of him to realize, hey, we got to pivot. We can't do it, just quite like everybody else does. But Locksley is one of my all-time favorite quotes. I think we've all gotten a chance to talk to him, Chris most recently, but just a hilarious quote, keeps it how it is. Like you want the guy to succeed, but it's a challenging job.
And he actually talked to Mike for something. I was going to say, I talked to Mike for something separate last week, actually, funny enough, that will come out later this season, I hope. But it's funny, in talking to Mike over the years, he's interesting because he's got an interesting standpoint as a guy who came up through a relationship-based recruiting aspect, right? Like that's how he made his bones. That's how he got the Maryland job, quite frankly. He literally got the Maryland job because he was something of a healing force after the unfortunate passing of Jordan McNair, for instance. Like he's somebody that, like he cleared it with the McNair family, for instance. The McNair family were like, we're good with this guy. And so he got the job. Like it's things like that. And he's sort of had this like existential reckoning over the last year or two as NIL and Rev Share have come into the fore. Basically, like, how do I do this job if recruiting is less about relationships and more about money? Like, what's my role in this? How do I build a roster? It's just interesting to see Maryland, obviously, is sort of turned a corner early on. But as someone who is, in my personal life, close to a Maryland fan, and obviously John can tell you as a Maryland grad here, Maryland folks are waiting for the other shoe to drop. They're all waiting for the other shoe to drop. I know how it is with you guys.
Sadly, unfortunately, it has to eventually turn to October. September Maryland is about to end, and the good days might get a little harder moving forward.
Well, I will tell you this. The October days are a lot easier when you got somebody like Malik Washington as your QB1 because he is special. There's a lot of attention paid to guys like Bryce Underwood earlier this year, but if you haven't watched Malik Washington play, you should. He is really outstanding, and he is a local kid from Maryland. If they can keep him for 3 or 4 years, I think they're going to be more than competitive.
They've got some good talent coming up through the ranks. Obviously, you know that, Chris, but they got some really top. And there's, again, as someone who went there, like there's been this idea of it, like, can this one guy be the Pied Piper and keep talent home? I can remember back to Stephon Diggs, and like it just has never quite worked. And Malik, I do think, in part because he's a QB and it's so impactful in so many ways that like he does have that potential.
Well, he's the only reason. Malik's the only reason Zaire Mathis is there. Like Zaire Mathis is one of those 2 true freshmen starting at outside linebacker for them. And the only reason he's even a Terp is because at the Under Armour All-American game earlier this year in December, in January, Malik Washington literally went to the air and be like, hey, you want to stay home? You want to like come close to home and do this? And like he got him back in communication with the Maryland coaches after that it had kind of fallen off the map when he was committed to Ohio State for a long time. So Malik Washington certainly had that effect early for Maryland.
We closed the book on September Maryland. We closed the book on September Insiders. We're going to be better in October than we were in September. We'll see if Maryland is as well. This has been the Tuesday edition of College Football Insiders. I'm your host, Richard Johnson. Chris Hummer, thank you. John Talty, thank you. We'll see you Thursday.